Hi, and welcome to Group 4's PLC report for Module 3, where we unpack the complex concepts of gender and sexuality in relation to education. We use two specific readings in combination with other course material to guide our discussion. We will unpack our thoughts in this summary video. Before we get started, let's introduce the group. As previously mentioned, we are Group 4, made up of 4 members: Caroline, Jamila, Anna, and Heather. Okay, let's get started. We first began by discussing Benjamin L. Hicks' article, Gracefully Unexpected, Deeply Present, and Positively Disruptive: Love and Queerness in the Classroom Community. We all agreed that the central takeaway of Hicks was the need for love, both in pedagogy and curricula, to be embedded within our schools. A definition of love provided for us was the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Instead, we decided to come up with our own group definition of love that was more digestible and applicable for us as L2 teachers. It was, love is fully accepting ourselves, and in doing so, fully accepting the selves of those around us, actively, while still appreciating that nothing is unchanging. One of the most profound phrases we found to support this central takeaway was, one of the queerest things a person can be is a teacher who talks about what love can look like in the North American public school curriculum. If love in education was the umbrella of this article, we found a few raindrops which were peripheral key terms like isolation, transness, and contradiction. The contradiction noted throughout the article was that of teaching being a heart-based profession, attracting only those with a true passion, actively asking those same teachers not to bring those emotions into the classroom. This was something we could all relate to as pre-service and experienced teachers. The next recurring theme we noted was that of transness and how its continued unexpectedness in the Ontario education system continues to ostracize transgender students and teachers. Lastly, we considered the final raindrop to be that of isolation, the isolation that comes with negotiating your own identity when there is a lack of representation and supportive policies. The sunshine, however, throughout the article was the notion of transitioning and how the queering of education is most meaningful when guided by the experience of knowing that every living thing at every living moment is always in transition. Particularly striking to us was the reaction of Hicks's class to their talking about their physical transition over the coming year. When spoken to with love and honesty about their teacher's vulnerability and transitioning, they responded by applauding. Hick's overall message of purposely incorporating love into classrooms as a pillar of queering education was inspiring to us as L2 educators. It provoked many conversations between us all as we attempted to navigate how we might actually be able to achieve this. The looming backdrop of our conversations were our administrators. How would they react to the changes we made? Would they be supportive? Would we be putting our jobs at risk? We all agreed Hicks's message was important, but we wondered, would it really be possible for us? We felt relieved and inspired as Hick described their simple, time-friendly attendance activity where each person in the room responded to roll call with an adjective instead of simply saying here. We all agreed this is a profound yet tangible and admin-friendly activity we can incorporate into our classrooms immediately to bring in more love and trust building. Another practical takeaway from this reading was the explicit incorporation of values like love, respect, inclusion, and peaceful resolution into our classroom roles. We really appreciated seeing we statements instead of I statements, and all agreed that this was something we could do in our own classrooms too. We've all been inspired and are now committed to building trustworthy and love-based classrooms for our L2 students, but some questions still remained in our minds. First, we thought about teacher burnout and wondered, will there be an increased emotional burden on teachers who commit to using this approach? And second, we grappled with whether or not this approach is appropriate for all ages of students. What about younger students with lower levels of emotional maturity? Is it still appropriate? And lastly, we wondered how effective this approach would be in a classroom where the students and their teachers do not necessarily have a mutual language, like L2 classrooms. Would it still work? Next, we discussed Pavlenko and Pillar's article, Language, Education, and Gender. But before we did this, we paused to discuss a question posed by the professor about gendered language we know. Focusing on English, we came up with many examples of gendered language, ranging from a simple "hey guys" to phrases like "ladies and gentlemen," to the disturbing trend of curse words and insults often being feminized. We decided that this article was like a tree, where gender and language was the tree itself, and access to resources, language learning, language curricula, and classroom interactions were the leaves, or periphery key terms. Under the first leaf of access to resources, we felt the key term was gatekeeping, where women in North America face hurdles to access language education that men may not. These gatekeeping practices include lack of daycare, inconvenient locations of lessons, and inconvenient timing of lessons. The key takeaway under language learning agency and gender is that language learning trajectories are not shaped by the essential nature of femininity or masculinity, but instead by gendered social, economic, and cultural specific ideologies of language. While a discussion surrounded notions of gender and race in this leaf, the key takeaway seemed to be that patterns of classroom interaction marginalize specific learners and/or groups of learners, which may not always be girls and women. This leaf helped us explore a variety of ways in which educators can incorporate notions of gender and language into their lessons, including pedagogical approaches like discussions, storytelling, personal narratives, and even explicit discussions surrounding gender identity. Of note to us, while not necessarily a key term, was the acknowledgement of the lens through which gender and language was looked at historically, through the notion of deficit. This reminded us of plurilingualism and how, in the past, and even still now, diversity of languages in classrooms can be looked at through the same notion of deficit. So, practically speaking, what did we learn that will be useful for our L2 careers? Our biggest takeaway was the need for us to be language teachers conscious of the ways in which our own conception of gender may impact how we approach various learners. As a result, we will now continually ask ourselves, are we giving equal attention to all learners? Do we believe all of our learners can succeed? Are we providing enough space for discussion? Are we creating accessible and safe language lessons? After all this, we still have some lingering questions. We wonder, how can pre-service teacher training programs incorporate mindfulness regarding gender and sexuality into their curricula? Are courses like these enough to ensure teachers have sound knowledge of how to create safe and fair learning spaces for all learners? If not, what more could be done? Our conversations also shifted to gender and teaching language, and not just learning language. We wondered, are there gatekeeping practices involved in the sphere of women teaching language? Are these practices unique to language teaching, or are they felt throughout the employment world? How can we combat them? Thank you very much for following along with our PLC group discussion for Module 3.